You never forget the exact temperature of a room when your own flesh and blood betrays you. When I reached out to touch my son's new degree, he jerked it away. Right in front of his professors, he told me that my uneducated hands were a stain on his achievement. He thought that was the end of the story. He didn't realize I still held all the strings. Before we continue, please subscribe and let us know where you're listening from. My name is Marcus. I'm 58 years old, and my hands tell the story of my life. There are scars across my knuckles from my 20s, calluses on my palms from my 30s, and a slight tremor in my left hand from the sheer exhaustion of my 40s. I never went to college. While the men in suits were sitting in lecture halls, I was under the hoods of diesel trucks, breathing in exhaust and building a hauling business from a single rusted flatbed into a fleet of 400. I built an empire in the dirt so my son, David, would never have to touch it. When my wife, Sarah, passed away from cancer 10 years ago, her final whisper to me was to make sure David got the best education in the world. I made that my religion. I paid for the private tutors. I paid the exorbitant tuition at the most elite prep schools on the East Coast. And when he was accepted into a prestigious Ivy League university for his undergraduate and then his master's degree in finance, I didn't just pay the tuition. I paid for his luxury apartment. I paid for his tailored suits. I funded the networking dinners he hosted. But somewhere along the line, the money I sent him became an entitlement, and my existence became a liability. I started noticing the shift during his sophomore year. When I would visit the campus, he would insist we meet at a coffee shop off campus. He stopped inviting me to his fraternity family weekends. When I asked him what he told his friends about me, he muttered that he told them I was a logistics manager. He scrubbed the grime of my life off his resume. I let it slide. I told myself it was just the insecurity of youth. I told myself that once he had that piece of paper, he would understand the sacrifice it took to buy it. I was wrong. Graduation day was a crisp Tuesday in May. The campus was a postcard of manicured lawns and Gothic stone architecture. I wore a custom-made suit, but I still felt the weight of my rough edges in a sea of generational wealth. I sat in the crowd for 3 hours, listening to speeches about merit and hard work, waiting for the single moment they called David's name. When he walked across that stage, my chest tightened. I was so incredibly proud. I thought we had finally crossed the finish line. After the ceremony, there was a private reception in the faculty hall for the top honors graduates. High ceilings, dark oak paneling, the quiet clinking of crystal champagne flutes. I spotted David near the center of the room. He was holding court with the dean of the business school, Dr. Alastair, and an older, distinguished man I recognized from Forbes magazine, a senior partner at an elite private equity firm in Manhattan. This was the firm David had been desperate to join, the firm he had just signed a contract with. I walked over. I didn't want to interrupt, but I wanted to stand beside my boy. As I approached, David's eyes darted toward me, and I saw it. The panic, the irritation, the shame. "Ah, this must be the proud father," Dr. Alastair said with a polite, rehearsed smile. David forced a stiff nod. "Yes, Marcus." "Not Dad. Marcus." He was holding the leather-bound folder containing his degree, the culmination of his life's work, the culmination of my life's labor. My heart swelled, overriding my better judgment. I reached out a hand. I just wanted to touch the leather. I just wanted to feel the physical proof that all the 80-hour work weeks, all the missed holidays, all the grease and sweat had actually amounted to something. My fingers were an inch away when David physically recoiled. He jerked the folder back with such force that it smacked against his chest. The sharp sound cut through the low hum of the room. The conversation around us stopped dead. "Don't!" David snapped, his voice tight and low. I froze. "I just wanted to see it, son." He looked at my hands. Then he looked at the senior partner from the equity firm, terrified of looking like a charity case. He turned his eyes back to me, and the disgust in them was entirely unmasked. "Your hands are filthy," David said, his voice carrying just enough to ensure the men next to him heard. "Having someone as uneducated as you touch this degree, is my greatest humiliation. Just give me some space." The silence that followed was suffocating. I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I clinically observed the people around us. The dean looked awkwardly at his shoes. The senior partner took a slow sip of his champagne, his face an unreadable mask. In that moment, a weaker man might have yelled. A prouder man might have slapped him. But I am a man who has spent 30 years negotiating with ruthless contractors and cutthroat freight unions. I know how to absorb a hit without showing blood. I looked at David, really looked at him. I saw the arrogant, hollow shell of a man I had financed. "Excuse me," I said quietly to the dean and the partner. I turned around and walked out of the hall. I kept my head down, shoulders slightly slumped, playing the exact part he had assigned me, the embarrassed, uncultured blue-collar worker retreating to the shadows. I walked across the perfectly cut grass. I walked to the visitor parking lot. I climbed into the cab of my truck, closed the door, and sat in the absolute silence. I didn't cry. The pain was there, sharp and ragged in my chest, but it was quickly being swallowed by something much colder, a profound, terrifying clarity. David thought he had just closed the book on my usefulness. He thought his new Ivy League degree and his shiny new contract at that private equity firm meant he was finally free of the dirt I came from. But David had a fatal blind spot. He was so obsessed with the pedigree of his professors and the wealth of his new bosses that he never actually looked into the corporate structure of the world he was entering. He only knew me as the guy who owned some trucks. He didn't know that over the last decade I had diversified. He didn't know I had set up a blind trust. I reached into my glove compartment and pulled out a manila folder. Inside was the ownership structure of a parent company called Vanguard Holdings. It was the parent company of the exact private equity firm whose partner he was just desperately trying to impress. I stared at the name on the majority shareholder document. My name. I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer in New York. The phone rang twice. "Marcus," the voice answered. "How was the graduation?" "Educational," I replied, my voice perfectly calm. "Listen to me closely. I need you to draft some documents. We're going to make some structural changes at the firm tomorrow morning, and I'm going to need a corner office cleared out." David wanted to show the world he didn't need me. He was about to find out what his world looked like when I actually agreed, and that was the moment everything changed. I spent the rest of that weekend in my garage, rebuilding the carburetor on a rusted '68 Mustang. My hands were covered in black grease. My mind was perfectly clear. I didn't call David. I didn't answer his 2 text messages. The first one read, "Sorry about Friday." The second sent 12 hours later. "Just making sure my rent transfer cleared for the first of the month." It was a transaction, a half apology designed entirely to protect his comfort. He just wanted to make sure his bank account was padded before he started his dream job at Sterling Cross Equity on Monday morning. Monday arrived with a cold gray rain over Manhattan. At 8 a.m., I walked through the revolving glass doors of the Sterling Cross building. I didn't wear a custom Italian suit this time. I wore a heavy canvas work jacket, dark jeans, and the same scuffed leather boots I used to walk the freight yards. The security guard in the lobby stepped in front of me. "Deliveries are through the loading dock around back, sir." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a solid black access card, and tapped it against the turnstile scanner. The screen flashed green. Executive level access. The guard stepped back, his eyes widening. I took the private elevator to the 40th floor. The doors slid open to a sprawling lobby of Italian marble and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Richard Vance, the senior partner I had seen at the graduation reception, was waiting by the reception desk. When he saw me, he bypassed 3 junior executives and walked straight over, extending his hand. "Marcus," Richard said, a warm, deferential smile on his face, "it is an absolute honor to finally have you in the office." "Good to be here, Richard," I said, shaking his hand. I had bought Vanguard Holdings, the parent company of Sterling Cross, 3 years ago. I did it to diversify my assets, to ensure David's inheritance was bulletproof. Richard had never met me in person, but he knew exactly whose name was at the top of the corporate ladder. "We have the orientation for the new associates in the boardroom at 9, Richard said as he walked me toward the corner office. "I'd love for you to sit in. Say a few words if you're up for it." "I'll be there," I said quietly, "but I won't need to say much." At 8:55 a.m., I took a seat at the head of the massive mahogany table in the executive boardroom. Richard sat to my right. 5 other senior partners filed in, taking their seats, speaking in hushed, respectful tones. At exactly 9 a.m., the heavy oak doors opened. The new associates walked in. 7 young men and women in razor-sharp suits, carrying leather portfolios, vibrating with the nervous arrogance of the newly elite. David was the third one through the door. He was smiling. He looked confident. He shook hands with a junior partner near the entrance, laughing at some polite corporate joke. Then he turned to face the head of the table. Our eyes met. I watched it happen in slow motion. The smile on my son's face didn't just fade, it shattered. The color completely drained from his cheeks. His perfectly styled posture collapsed. He stopped walking so abruptly that the associate behind him bumped into his shoulder. He looked at me in my canvas jacket. He looked at Richard Vance sitting beside me. He looked back at me. His brain was violently trying to reject the reality of what he was seeing. "Take a seat, everyone," Richard said warmly. The associates scrambled to the leather chairs. David practically fell into his, directly across from me at the far end of the long table. "Before we begin," Richard continued, gesturing toward me, "I want to introduce you to a very rare guest. This is Marcus. He is the founder and majority shareholder of Vanguard Holdings. As you know, Vanguard owns Sterling Cross. He is, for all intents and purposes, the man who signs all of our paychecks." The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the rain hitting the glass 40 stories up. David's hands were shaking. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I leaned forward. I placed my hands flat on the table. The scars on my knuckles caught the recessed lighting. "We actually met on Friday, Richard," I said. My voice was calm, measuring every syllable. Richard looked surprised. "Really? At the reception?" "Yes," I said, keeping my eyes locked dead on my son. "But David didn't introduce us?" "He was a bit preoccupied. He was busy telling me that my hands were too filthy and too uneducated to touch his new diploma." The temperature in the room plummeted. The associate sitting next to David slowly slid his chair an inch away. Richard Vance froze, his smile vanishing instantly. The senior partners stared at David with a mixture of shock and utter disgust. In the cutthroat world of private equity, pedigree is everything, but loyalty and respect for the boss are survival. David had just been outed as a liability. "Dad," David whispered. It was the first time he had called me Dad in 4 years. His voice cracked. "Dad, please." "I'm speaking to an employee," I replied coldly, "not my son." Tears welled in his eyes. The arrogance was gone. The pedigree was gone. Stripped down to his core in front of the very people he had worshipped, he was just a terrified boy, realizing the floor had given out beneath him. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry." "You're not sorry, David," I said softly. "You're just caught." I stood up. I walked slowly down the length of the boardroom. Every eye in the room tracked my movement. I stopped right behind his chair. "I could fire you right now," I said, my voice hovering just above a whisper. "Richard would have your security badge deactivated before you reach the elevator. But firing you is a luxury you haven't earned." I reached inside my canvas jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I slid it over his shoulder and onto the table in front of him. "As of midnight last night, the trust fund financing your life was legally dissolved," I told him. "The lease on your penthouse is canceled. Your credit cards have been zeroed out." David stared at the paper. It was a transfer order. "Sterling Cross recently acquired a struggling logistics company in Ohio," I continued. They need a night shift dispatch manager. It pays $45,000 a year. You'll be working out of a portable trailer on a dirt lot. You'll be routing diesel trucks, and you will be answering to men who have grease permanently stained into their hands. I leaned down, my voice right next to his ear. You can sign that transfer, get on a bus tomorrow, and learn how the real world actually works. Or you can walk out of that door right now with your degree and nothing else. No money, no references, just you. David looked down at the paper. A single tear broke free and splashed against the ink. He was trembling. He looked around the room, making eye contact with the senior partners. They looked away. There was no rescue coming. He picked up the pen. His hand shook violently, but he pressed the ink to the page and signed his name. I picked up the paper, folded it, and put it back in my jacket. Your bus leaves at 6 a.m., I said. I didn't say another word. I turned around, walked out of the boardroom, and took the elevator down to the street. When I stepped out into the rain, I took a deep breath. My chest hurt. He was my son, and breaking him was the hardest thing I had ever done. But as I looked down at my rough, calloused hands, I knew I had made the right choice. These hands had built an empire, and now they were going to rebuild my son. Thank you for listening. Subscribe for stories like this, and share your honest thoughts below.